Tinned and soldered cooking vessels were extremely common in the 18th century. You can see them in all sorts of cooking situations, hearth settings, or at campsites. Today we're going to talk about how to take care of and use your tinned or soldered cooking vessel so it'll last a lifetime. Whether you're using a tin cooking pot, a brass trade kettle, or one of these beautiful pieces of copper, there are certain very important things you need to be aware of about how to use them and how to clean them. Tin cooking pots like this are the most common cooking implement for soldiers during the Revolutionary War time period. Really the only thing that was issued to them for cooking in. Now, the first rule on all these pots, this one included, is that a pot like this put over the fire when it's empty might ruin the pot in seconds. It'll start to melt the joints if it doesn't have any contents in it. The same can be said for these tin-lined cooking pots. The tin melts at about 450 degrees, so if you set this over a fire empty, the tin will immediately start to melt and run down the sides of the vessel. By the way, these brass trade kettles are exceptional reproductions, beautifully handmade. They're perfect for 17th, 18th, and 19th century, great for the hearth, and really good for the field too. The purpose of tin lining the copper and brass vessels is to create a protective coating in between the food that's being cooked and the outer cooking vessel, the copper and the brass. Some foods, especially acidic foods, will cause some of the copper to leach out and react with the food. Historically, many of the brass and copper pots in the time period were untinned. They didn't have any tin lining in them, and cooks in the time period knew exactly how to cook in them so that they didn't get poisoned. But tin-lined pots are very common, easily documented for the time period, and many of the period texts that talk about cooking specifically refer to making sure your pot has a good tin lining within them. So the tin inside these tin-lined pots is a much safer metal to work with, but it is soft and you have to take a lot of care of it when you're using it. The metal, as you use these pots, may start to turn a darker color. That is a perfectly normal reaction in the tin, and it doesn't really change its protective qualities. After long use, you may notice the lining starting to wear away. And if you see large spots of brass or copper exposed, it's time to have your pots relined. To prolong the life of the tin lining in your cooking pot, you really need to make sure to use wooden cooking implements. Don't use anything that's hard, any kind of metal instrument at all, or you'll scratch the lining of your pot. When cooking with these tin-lined cooking vessels, you need to make sure that you have as much fluid in them as possible. If you have less than a full amount, you have to be careful. If you put this over a roaring fire, it will start to heat up the areas above the spot where the food is at, and it'll start to melt the tin away from that area. So you want to use just as much fire as you really need to get the cooking done. These transfer the heat very quickly, and so it does not take a roaring fire to cook with these vessels, and the less fire the better, the longer your tin lining is going to last. When you're done cooking and it's time to clean the inside of your pot, you want to make sure to use only a mild detergent and a cloth on the inside when you're cleaning. Don't use any sort of scouring pad. You don't want to wear away the surface. If you have cooked on food that's difficult to remove, just soak it overnight. Maybe you could warm it up a little bit, and then that will come off very easily. An excellent way to clean the outside of your copper pot is to use a lemon wedge. You dip that in a little bit of salt, and then you just rub it on the outside of the pot. If you don't have a lemon wedge, then what you want to use is a little bit of vinegar as a substitute. There are also numerous commercial copper cleaners available on the market. Now, regardless of which method you use, you need to make sure to rinse off the outside of your pot completely to get rid of all the cleaner, and then dry it off before you store it. In other videos, we'll be discussing in detail all the different cooking vessels here, as well as demonstrating some 18th century recipes that you can use with your tinned cooking pots. all the items you've seen here today, all the cooking vessels, even the clothing I'm wearing. These things are all available on our website in our print catalog. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't forget to follow us on Facebook.